Okay, welcome to week 8 of our Common Core course on science and religion. Today we're going to be delving slightly deeper into what we mean when we say that something is real. So last week we looked at our intuition for what feels real, and that did not lead to consensus. And then we looked at naturalism and materialism and physicalism, which are words that are often bandied around, particularly in connection with science, to denote what is real. And we found that they did not help us as much as we might have hoped. So this week, we're going to delve slightly deeper into ways of thinking about what is real. So just as we found that there is not one simple truth that's truthy and all other truths are uninteresting, we looked at multiple kinds of truth. We're going to find there are multiple ways of slicing realism as well. And this week we're going to look at 4 of them, namely ontological realism, semantic realism, epistemic realism, and symbolic realism. So here we go. Ontological realism. So just as a note, all of these, the first 3 are taken from an excellent paper by Chakravarti, which is freely available online. And also I think we have a copy saved on the Moodle. So go read that, it's a good paper. Ontological realism is committed to the mind-independent existence of the world. That says the world exists and doesn't care what I think about it, which kind of seems reasonably obvious, right? My flask is indifferent to my opinion of my flask. Okay, this makes my flask real. Fine. So let's consider, for example, aliens. This was one that, when looking at our intuition last week, was a coin toss between you guys. What does realism with respect to aliens look like? So aliens exist regardless of what we think about them. If we discover evidence for aliens living 1,000 light years away, right? When we get the evidence for it, the aliens don't suddenly pop into existence, right? They exist regardless of the fact that we've just discovered them or not. Now, for people who don't think that aliens exist, this doesn't mean to say you are anti-realist with respect to aliens. What it means is you think they don't exist, regardless of what we think about. So a realist stance towards aliens says aliens, whether or not they exist, either exist independent of our opinion or don't exist independent of our opinion. The universe doesn't care what we think. This is a realist stance with respect to aliens. Now, an anti-realist stance is to say the universe does care what we think. Aliens only exist if you believe in them. And like fairies, when you stop believing in them, they gently fade away. Now, with respect to aliens, this may seem like a very strange way of running our universe. Surely aliens on the other side of the universe don't care what we think. What would? I mean, is my mind strong enough to create something, to bring it into being? About what would it be reasonable to be anti-realistic? Here we go. Money. Now, it looks pretty real, right? It exists. And if I got knocked on the head and stopped thinking about it, it wouldn't blink out of existence. But let's be more specific. Let's say monetary value, right? What is this worth? Okay, a $20 note is worth $20. I can go into a shop and exchange it for a cup of coffee and I get $20 worth of coffee, right? But it's only worth $20 because the person in the shop believes it's worth $20, right? We have a convention within society that says this piece of paper, which the Hang Seng Bank can print off at nominal cost, becomes worth $20. And if we stopped agreeing that, if we said that blue things were an abomination that should be burned, and this is what everyone agreed, then it would stop being worth $20. So monetary value does not have a mind-independent existence in the world. And yet, I mean, we'd be hard-pressed to say that, like, monetary value is nothing. I mean, you can't get coffee without money. Like, money makes the world go round, and yet we have money as something which, from an ontological point of view, is not real. And in fact, money type things, monetary value in general, is not real. Gold, we say, well, you know, gold is the standard. With money became this convention when we took it off the gold standard. But why is gold valuable? Why is it that all of humanity said this shiny yellow stuff, we're going to count that as being valuable? We can't say, well, it's rare, because lots of things are rare. I mean, my toenail clippings are rare. It's much more rare than gold, but people don't keep hordes of my toenail clippings in a bank vault somewhere. Gold is considered valuable because it's considered valuable. We agree that it is. The value of gold and the valuelessness of my toenail clippings is a social convention that everyone agrees. Now, you know, if someone said, hey, I've got Elvis's nail clippings, right, you could auction them off for loads. This is a convention. But the value, the monetary value of something is not a property of the universe itself, independent of human minds. Okay, how about in religion? What happens in religion? Let's consider a realist stance towards God. If ontological realism is committed to the mind-independent existence of the world, particularly the human mind, let's specify that here, then if I change my mind about God, if I think differently about God, if I used to think that he was vengeful and mean and nasty, and then I change my mind and I think he's kind and loving and fluffy, God hasn't necessarily changed, right? If I think that if I used to think this is worth $20 and then I change my mind and think it's worthless and should be burned, right? It has changed. The value of this piece of paper has changed because I've changed my opinion of it. Whereas God exists independent of my opinion. Now, some people look at religion and they say, look at your image of God through time, right? It just keeps on changing. Therefore, there's something, you know, your God cannot be real because your opinion keeps on changing. But in fact, the fact that we can change our opinion of God and still believe that it's the same God we are worshipping is a sign that we are taking a realist stance towards God. Our opinion of God is not the same as God himself. He is an entity which exists independently of what we think. Now, interestingly, science doesn't always take this view. Science, you know, if you listen to Richard Dawkins, science talks about things that are real, whereas ontologically speaking, one of the strongest anti-realist positions you will find is in science. If you look at quantum mechanics, right? If I have, so this picture here, this is a hydrogen atom, and my electron might be here, or my electron might be here. If I don't know where my electron is, then my electron does not have a position. It's not meaningful to even say, what is the electron's position? Because the answer is, it doesn't have a position until we know what its position is, or until we measure its position. So in quantum mechanics, we have this strongly anti-realist position in the standard interpretation of quantum mechanics. There are realist interpretations of quantum mechanics, and they have to do very strange things elsewhere in order to rescue realism. But the standard interpretation of quantum mechanics is anti-realist. It says the universe doesn't have a mind-independent existence. So have we returned to our dichotomies, right? Now, previously when we looked at, you know, facts and values and all of our dichotomies that we had previously, we found that if you scratched much below the surface, actually these dichotomies, they tended to blur into one another. And in fact, this is what we see with realist positions and anti-realist positions as well. So let us take as an example a tree. Does a tree have a mind-independent existence? Now, on the face of it, yes, right? When you hit a tree, the pain that you feel in your hand is caused by something in the world out there. It's not all in your mind, right? The tree is a thing which doesn't care what you think about it. And a tree has property. Let's think of some of the properties of a tree, right? So a tree can be used for fuel, or it can be used for shade, right? These are properties in the world out there that don't care what I think, except they're not. They really aren't. The notion that a tree is fuel or shade, these are culturally determined properties. They exist in our head. A tree, when you look at a tree and you think this tree is shade, you are coming to that tree, you are seeing that tree, experiencing that tree, interacting with that tree in a culturally prepared way. So there are things in the world out there, like properties of the tree, such as it being flammable and it being opaque. But a thing being flammable is not the same as a thing being fuel. So, for example, a flag is flammable, but it's not a fuel. You don't throw a flag onto the fire unless you're trying to do something different. When you take something which is flammable, but not a fuel, it cries out, it draws attention to itself, right? When you burn a stick, no one takes photos of it in the street. But when you burn a flag, you get onto the front page of the newspaper, right? This is flammable, but it's illegal to burn it. Dead babies are flammable, but you don't burn them. Or when you do burn them, you do so in a very particular sense, in a very particular time, in a very particular way. You don't just throw them onto the fire and use them as fuel. So to see a tree as fuel is different from seeing a tree as flammable. One is culturally conditioned and the other is not. Shade and opacity, they're not the same thing. So for example, if I have a gravestone is just as opaque as my tree. But if I have a choice between sitting under a tree for my picnic and propping myself up against a gravestone to sit in a gravestone's shade, we don't sit in the shade of a gravestone. It's just as opaque as a tree, but it's not considered appropriate to use it simply in a utilitarian purpose for shade. So when we see a tree, we come to a tree with the physical reality of the tree impinging on us, but also with our own cultural preconceptions as to how we interact with a tree. And so the picture in our head of a tree is this amalgam of the two. And so a person who says, when I punch a tree, I am punching a thing out there, they have a point. And the person who says, when I interact with a tree, I'm interacting in a way conditioned by and dependent on all of my cultural mind-dependent preconceptions, they also have a point. And so a tree is somewhere in the middle. That's the natural world. What happens in, for example, the human world? So let's look at sex and gender in this realist, anti-realist picture. So sex is a thing in the world out there. If you have an XY chromosome, you are male, right? This is not up for debate. You don't say, maybe I do have an XY chromosome, maybe I don't. My opinion of what chromosomes I have changes depending on social convention. No, you have an XY chromosome or you don't. And if you have an XY chromosome, you're male. So we say, okay, sex is a physical thing. It's a thing that we can view in a realist perspective. Gender, on the other hand, is culturally constructed. Having long hair, wearing lipstick, wearing high heels. Is it a masculine thing or a feminine thing to wear high heels? This is something which doesn't have an existence independent of our culture, of our way of thinking. So this then says, okay, so we now have sex we view with a ontologically realist frame, and gender we view as an ontologically anti-realist frame. So where's the blurring of the boundaries? Okay, well, let's look at this. Is my sex set as if I have an XY chromosome, I am male? Or is it set as if I have a penis, I am male? Or is it set as I am male if I have a certain level of certain hormones? Or is it set as something else? Because while there is no debate that a particular person has an XY chromosome, you just do the test, you take a sample, you send it off to the lab, and the lab comes back and says, yes, this person has an XY chromosome. That's not a matter of opinion, a matter of cultural convention. But there's nothing in the universe that says a person that has XY chromosomes is therefore a male. There are many cultures in the world that says a person with a penis is a male. And if you have a person who has XY chromosomes but no penis, the two different cultural conventions of how to understand being male clash and disagree. So in the case of Caster Semenya, who's an excellent athlete, tremendously fast, and runs as a woman in a women's athletics tournaments, and she's tremendously fast. And the athletics body said, we want you to undergo a sex test. We are going to test you to see if you're a man or a woman, and we are going to test your chromosomes to see what chromosomes you have, because that's the thing that decides whether you're a man or a woman. Now, Semenya's grandmother at this point stood up absolutely outraged and said, don't be ridiculous. She is my granddaughter. I raised her myself. I changed her nappies. She is a woman. Now, in a culture that says a person that doesn't have a penis is a woman, Semenya's grandmother was entirely correct. And in a culture that says a person that has an XY chromosome is not a woman, then the Athletics Association was correct. And so here we have a cultural construction of sex. So boundaries are being blurred. So just jumping in and saying, okay, we're realist about this, or we're anti-realist about this, it's more nuanced than that. Okay, so much for ontological realism. Ontological realism is a commitment to a mind-independent existence of reality. Semantic realism. Semantic realism is committed to a literal interpretation of the claims made about the world. So, I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. Sounds simple enough? Here we go. Let's take an example. So a realist scientist, when their detector goes ping, will say, my detector went ping. And what they mean by that is, my detector went ping. That seems tremendously simple. So we have a phenomenon here, and the detector goes ping, and they say the detector went ping, and what they mean is their detector went ping. Take this literally. But what happens, because when you write a scientific paper, you never write a paper that just says my detector went ping. What you say is, I detected an electron. I have an electron detector. It's called an electron detector for a reason. When it goes ping, that means it's detected an electron. And a semantic realist says, when I say I detected an electron, what I mean is I detected an electron. And by electron, I have an idea in my head as to what that is. By electron, I mean a fundamental negatively charged particle with a mass about 0.5 megaelectron-volt. Okay, I have this notion, this theoretical notion of an electron, and when I say I detected this thing, that's what I mean. And you say, ah, right, but this is some positive noumenon. All you saw was you saw your detector going ping. And a semantic realist says, yes, I saw my detector go ping, and what I detected was an electron. Now, an anti-realist, on the other hand, agrees their detector went ping. They said, yes. And what they say is, I detected an electron. They write a paper and they said, I detected this electron. But what they mean is, my detector went ping. So the statement, I detected an electron, should not be taken literally. It doesn't really mean that. It's just shorthand for saying, my theory says that if there is an electron in my system, my detector will go ping, and my detector went ping. But that just takes too long. So shorthand, they say, I detect an electron. But they don't mean that. So this is an anti-realist position. Now, that seems simple enough. But then there are also, again, strange ways of fudging this that sort of sit in a slightly anti-realist way. So, for example, there's constructive empiricism. Now, they, like the realist and the anti-realist, agree. They say their detector went ping, and when I write my paper, what I'm going to say is I detect an electron. And when I say I detect an electron, what I mean is I detected an electron. So from this point of view, they are being semantically realist because they are committed to a literal interpretation of the claims that they make about the world. When they say I detect an electron, they mean I detect an electron. However, because they've sat down and they said, science has a really poor grasp of noumena. So when I say I have an electron in my system, I really mean this thing that's like half a mega electron volt and negatively charged, but although I say I have an electron, I might be wrong. The universe might be doing something completely different because I really can't get a good handle on noumena. So while I say I detect an electron, what I believe is my detector went ping. So here we go. So our constructive empiricist and our realist both say what they mean. And our anti-realist and our constructive empiricist both believe what they saw. And our realist and our anti-realist both believe what they mean. So here we have an interesting set of combinations. So semantic realism is basically to say, when I say something, it should be taken more or less at face value. Okay, so much for science. What happens because we're doing science and religion? What happens in religion? Okay, so I previously said that within Christianity, you can have realist, ontologically realist views of God, but you can have semantically anti-realist views of God. So let's say when Isaiah, the prophet, says, surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear. Does Isaiah literally mean God is humanoid with arms and ears? No. When he says this, he doesn't intend it to be taken literally. You say, well, yes, of course, that's pictorial language. But this pictorial language runs throughout certainly Christian thinking and religious thinking in general. So let's take, for example, we've already discussed sex and gender. Now let's look at sex and God. Okay, is God male or female? And the answer is no. Catechism of the Catholic Church says God transcends the human distinctions between the sexes. He is neither man nor woman. He is God. Right? Look at the pronoun there. He is God. So what the Catholic Church is saying is we are going to use the pronoun he to refer to God, but please don't take this at face value. Please don't think just because we're saying he, we mean he in the same way as we mean he when we talk about the Pope as a he. God is different. We're going to use this word, but please don't take it at face value. What we mean is go on a theology course and we'll discuss it for a year and a half. But for short, we're going to say he. So we can have a semantically anti-realist position towards statements about God. But we're not always semantically anti-realist about statements about God. So, for example, when Paul says Christ died for our sins, he was buried and he was raised on the third day, some people would be semantically anti-realist about this. They say, oh, when the Bible says Jesus was raised from the dead, this is a metaphor. This is a hyperbola. This is mystical speech. Obviously, it was metaphorically raised from the dead. It was raised in our hearts. And Paul says, no, I really, really mean this. Take this literally. Jesus Christ was raised from the dead. So Paul is being semantically realist about this claim regarding Jesus. And we say, okay, well, this is obvious, right? We can see what's going on here. One is in the physical world. There's a physical person who gets up, and so Christians are semantically realist about this. And one is a prophetic vision, so we understand that we can be semantically anti-realist about this. But again, we hit points where it becomes maybe less obvious where the distinction runs. So, for example, we have now a prophetic text where the prophet Daniel says, "As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days, God, took his seat, and his clothing was as white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool, and his throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire." Now, many people look at this and say, this is pictorial language, just like God's arm is not too short to save. We don't take this literally. There are some people, however, who look at this and say, God has a wheelchair. God's in a wheelchair. And there are theologians who have developed a theology of disability, which takes as a springboard, or one of the sort of provocations for doing it, to say, God often turns up in a wheelchair. So in this sense, they are being semantically realist. They are taking God is in a throne with wheels. They're taking it at face value. So within science, we can see people who are semantically realist and semantically anti-realist, and things that kind of fudge the middle. And within religion, we can say things which are semantically realist and semantically anti-realist, and things which seem to sit somewhere in the middle. Okay, so much for semantic realism. Third one, epistemic realism. Lots of long words this week. So epistemic realism is committed to theoretical claims constituting knowledge of the world. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Let's take, so a realist position would say, for example, atomic theory is true. When we have this theory of atoms, right, that is telling us something about the world. An anti-realist position would say, atomic theory lets me make models that lead to correct enough predictions about pressure and temperature and volume. Okay, so if you remember from the Q&A session last week with Bassem Frasens talking about empirical adequacy, we say this theory is adequate. It's good enough to tell me what I'm going to see at a phenomenological level, but I make no claims about whether it's true. And if I say it's adequate rather than true, then I'm saying it doesn't constitute knowledge of the world. I have a theory that involves hard billiard balls, but that's not knowledge of what the world is actually doing. So an epistemically realist approach to science says, my posited noumena, my theoretical claims, give me knowledge of the world. And an anti-realist view is the one that we've, as in David and I, have tended to take in this course when discussing noumena and phenomena, in science at least, saying our posited noumena don't necessarily give us knowledge of the world. Okay. Now, turning to religion, for example, whereas I've said in science our posited noumena don't necessarily actually scratch our itch of really what the world is doing, really what the actual noumena are. If you look in religion, for example, it's very common to have epistemic realism. So, for example, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, says God to Moses. Now, God bringing the people out of Egypt is a statement about what the universe is actually like. Now, the phenomena that they saw, okay, so they saw plagues of frogs, they saw darkness, they saw a burning bush, they saw a pillar of fire, they saw a pillar of smoke. These are all phenomena. But the underlying noumenon that we now posit is we say this was all the work of God. This was God bringing them out of Egypt. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't weird, freaky, natural phenomena. This was the hand of God at work. And when Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and is given the 10 Commandments, and God says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, this is a claim about noumena, and a Christian would say this constitutes knowledge of the world. This is not, you know, some anti-realist claim where we don't actually know what's going on. A Christian says we do know what's going on because it's been revealed to us. How revelation constitutes a source of knowledge we're going to get to in a couple of weeks. But here we go. This is an epistemically realist claim. Okay, now we can put these ideas together. It's been hinted at already through this talk that one doesn't need to be realist in all manners of realism about all things, or anti-realist in all manners of anti-realism about all things. One can pick and choose and put together a sort of mixed bag as you will. So, for example, you can be ontologically realist about aliens and ontologically anti-realist about money. And you can be, while being ontologically anti-realist about money, you can be semantically realist about money. So let's look at some of these combinations that you can have. So, for example, an electron made my detector go ping. So here's an electron detector. They usually don't go ping, but for the sake of the argument, we're going to say they do. Now, I'm ontologically realist about that statement. I'm going to lay these down as the way I approach the world. Other people view it differently. You go to philosophy journals and you will see every possible way of slicing this under the sun. But here we go. Here's how I would take this. I would say I am ontologically realist about my detector going ping. This is not just all in my mind, right? Something really happened out there and it doesn't care about my opinion of it. I'd kind of be semantically realist in as much as I'd go with a constructive empiricist view that says, when I say an electron made my detector go ping, I really mean an electron made my detector go ping. Though I would admit that while that's what I mean, I may well be wrong in that, because it might be something else that's electrons are just weirder than I expect or something. So I'd be semantically realist, but in this constructive empiricist sense. And I'd be epistemically anti-realist about it, because an electron making my detector go ping, this is a statement about the noumena. And I'm not comfortable with saying that I really know something about the universe, because I don't think I know it. I might mean it, but I don't believe it. So how about the statement that $20 is 2 times $10? Well, I'm semantically realist about that. I mean, I really mean that. When I say that a $20 note has twice the value of a $10 note, that's exactly what I mean, and you can take it at face value. I'm also being epistemically realist. I believe that these theoretical constructs, the notion of a dollar, the notion of money, the notion of being able to count dollars and add them and subtract them and multiply them and compare them, right? This tells me something about the world. It tells me something about money. This is proper knowledge. Though when I say it tells me something about the world, I have to say that I'm ontologically anti-realist about money. So it's not a mind-independent world. What I'm saying is I know something about the system that we have culturally created. How about Descartes? I think, therefore I am. When I am thinking, what do I think about my thoughts? Okay, this is epistemically realist. My thinking is genuinely telling me something about the universe, right? This is a genuine point of connection to reality. I know something. I know I am thinking. And I'd also be ontologically realist about it. There is a me doing the thinking, quite independent of my opinion of me. But I'd be semantically anti-realist about it. If you ask me to pin down what I mean by me, I could probably give you a definition. It would probably be a pretty lousy one. And if I went away and thought for a lot longer, I might come up with a different one. So when I say me, I probably don't mean me in the way that I mean it. I probably mean something bigger if I thought about it carefully. So we see in each of these cases, I can be epistemically realist about something, and epistemically anti-realist about others. I can be semantically realist about some things and semantically anti-realist about others. And I can be ontologically realist about some things and ontologically anti-realist about others. So the moral of this lecture is, when someone says, are you a realist? The answer is almost certainly not yes. And the answer is probably not no. And a good answer may well look something like, buy me a cup of tea and we can sit down and talk about it. So with that beating against the goads of simplicity, I'm now going to pass over to David, who is going to talk about symbolic realism, another sort of realism we want to discuss.